set up a coalition called the Blended Finance Task Force. And today we're here to talk about financing what is really, I think, the hottest topic at Davos this year. So rather than give you a long introduction, because we'll have wonderful remarks from the people that you can see on the stage here, I just firstly wanted to acknowledge everyone online with us today. I know Davos is not always the most inclusive event, so thank you for dialing in. And then all the people in the audience today. This is a discussion, so put up your hand, be very interactive, challenge our panelists, and share your experiences as well on this wonderful topic. We're going to, as I said, be talking about scaling a green hydrogen economy in Namibia, and it's my absolute pleasure to invite James to the podium to share some remarks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kat. It's been a while since I was at this podium, but it's good to be back. It's always a pleasure to be able to talk to anyone actually who's willing to listen a little bit about what Namibia is looking to do. So this morning we explored in some detail the various potential opportunities in Namibia. As we unlocked and discovered this morning, they far outweigh or reach further than just the large hyphen project that we're looking to develop in the Karas region. I was extremely proud, I must say, of my fellow citizens who were able to articulate their intentions to produce hot briquetted iron, for example, by reducing iron ore with hydrogen. We had Sven talking about their ambitions to build a liquid ammonia bulk terminal. And of course, we heard from Broadmine Mining, who were looking to develop rare earth deposits in the Kalkveld. And what came out was a beautiful tapestry of a united Namibia that is moving in unison, pursuing this one vision to become an enabler of essentially a decarbonization agenda and a just energy transition. Importantly, what came out from that session is Namibia is not just looking to do this to create local jobs or to industrialize the local economy. No, it's actually looking to be a friend and an enabler to others as well. And so, what came out was our ambition to decarbonize the region, to help South Africa and the SAPP in general, to provide cheap electrons. And what we also mentioned is that, again, we're not alone in that ambition either. We recapped about how Robert Habeck, the Vice Chancellor of Germany, was here yesterday, and he met our President and our Minister of Mines and Energy. And what he told the President is that the two Ministers of Energy have actually now deployed their teams to start carrying out specific studies that will look at how it is that we can leverage the Hyphen project, given its proximity to South Africa, and look to build and enhance, for example, the grid, and look to explore on how we can use either battery energy storage systems or even regeneration assets that may very well use the hydrogen to produce more than enough electricity for Namibia, but to start getting that into the SAPP. Now, those extremely practical, realistic conversations are happening in Namibia today. And today we're looking to have another one of those. Because as we look to build these assets, the transmission grid, the battery storage assets, and link that to a Hyphen project, we're going to have to think about how it is that we fund the construction and the coupling of these assets into the SAPP, let alone when we start exploring the construction of the port-related assets that we would need to be linking to Europe. And so today we have brought some really good friends that I'm sure Kat will introduce that will now start delving into the details of how do you deploy what Kat calls fit-for-purpose capital. I enjoy that word so much. We obviously talk about the integrated national financing framework in our DFA. We talk about blended financing approaches, but fit-for-purpose capital sounds like a really good way to sum up what it is that we'll be looking to discuss today. So Kat, let me stop there. I think I've painted the bigger picture of why we're here, and I'll hand over the mic back to your capable self. Thank you, Kat.
Thank you so very much. Fit for purpose is my word of the week, or my 3 words of the week, and it's because so much capital, especially climate capital, is actually not fit for purpose. And so that's the type of discussion that we want to have today, an honest look at money that's going into green, an honest look at money that's looking to invest in transition, and also an understanding of what capital in the room today really needs to step up, de-risk, catalyse, link pipeline development to institutional capital. And we're really proud, actually, to have so many colleagues in the room today from the public sector, from development banks, from the private sector, from insurers. I think I saw Swiss Re in here earlier. We've got banks here, including on the panel. We've got philanthropy in the room. I think I saw Kelly walk in earlier. And we've got project developers. And it's wonderful to have people who don't necessarily always speak to each other in the same room. So if we have a successful session today, we'll learn a lot about the hydrogen opportunity in Namibia. We're going to crack, hopefully, some of the financing challenges, and that's on you, actually, in the audience. We're going to crack some of those challenges and make sure that those capital connections are being made. And I think we're going to be a little bit inspired. And that takes me to introducing my new favourite person this week, actually. Minister, I had the pleasure of meeting you yesterday. You talked to us about the importance of regional transition, and you have, for some reason, listened to me on a Saturday morning ranting about the opportunities linked to blended finance and matching different types of capital with different risk appetites so that we can go faster. The green hydrogen economy is inevitable. It will scale, it is investable, and Namibia is so lucky it's blessed with some of these natural assets which make it the potential to be the world's best green hydrogen hub. But if it doesn't move fast enough, then we don't tackle and address the climate goals under Paris. So, Minister, without further ado, I would love to welcome you up here. Thanks for all the time that you've given me this week, and I'm ready to be inspired, so thank you. No pressure.
Thank you very much, Kath and James. I'm not sure whether I have the ingredients to inspire Kath, but I believe she's already inspired. So you agree with me, the energy that she's exuding. It's it's already. I don't think you can compete with that energy. So great to be here, and I believe James has already told us why we're here. This morning, in fact, since we started on Monday yesterday, we have been talking about green hydrogen, renewable energy. We have talked a lot about science. The scientists were talking about how they put energy together to produce products like ammonia, like methanol, and stuff like that. But this is like the hard stuff, It's like you have the body, but the body needs blood for it to function. And I believe financing is really the blood that you need in that vascular system, cardiovascular system for this ecosystem that we are talking about to function. So today, or this moment, we're talking about that missing ingredient that we have not really talked about in the other sessions. How do we bring what Kat called capital fit for purpose together to support this vital infrastructure of these vital projects that we are talking about? Because there are a lot of underlying projects that we are going to invest into. We're talking about transmission infrastructure, we're talking about common user infrastructure, we're talking about manufacturing plants. So there's a pipeline there. Well, that pipeline needs capital to make it happen. But you also know that because of the complexity of all these activities that are involved, we need to find a better way of coordinating it so that the capital that is fit for purpose, and of course those that are in finance will probably say, the weighted average of capital has to be managed in such a way that it's reduced so that Namibia can be a competitive producer of renewable energies. That's very, very critical. So some of the numbers that that my colleagues from Systemic have helped us to put together, for instance, is that if we don't get the capital right, it's going to make it difficult for us to be competitive. So we need to bring all sorts of capital together. Just to give an example, for instance, The cost of producing hydrogen at the moment is in the region of about 450 US dollar. Sorry, ammonia. Sorry, ammonia. It's in the region of about 450 to 400 to 450. Now, if you just reduce the cost of capital by 1%, you knock off already about 30 US dollar from that. That makes a big difference, and that's what we need to think about, so that we can reduce the cost of capital, so that we can produce ammonia on a competitive basis. So I believe we have all these big brains here that are going to help us to find ways of bringing together different sources of capital. And here we're talking about, of course, there are those that have got commercial money, private money that needs to invest in these underlying projects. There are philanthropists that are looking to invest in infrastructure that is going to make the world a better place, because we are investing in renewable energy that is going to help us with the climate, because we all want to contribute to reach net zero goals and make the world a better place to live. So you have donors, you have philanthropists, you also have multilateral institutions that want to fund these fantastic projects. The question is, how do we bring them all together under one platform? Because coordination has always been a problem in managing all these complex products. So SDG1 that we are talking about today is really a platform that we want to create. It's a conversation that we have already started about a year ago in Namibia, to create a framework that help the whole of government to think about different sources of financing. So when we are looking at, for instance, investing in a port, how do we bring all these sources of finance together in an optimal way that makes the cost of capital affordable? So today we're just launching one of those aspects of that integrated financial framework, so that we can really demonstrate that what we have been talking about, it's something that can be implemented practically. And from now on, we're now going to work hard to start really put infrastructure together to make sure that this framework is put together. We can even automate, part of this framework, because I think if we can automate it and find a way of putting some information that you are all going to access. So if you want to know, what sort of infrastructure projects or what sort of projects are in the pipeline, so you can log on that platform and you can find that information. But we also want to have somebody that you talk to, not just you talking to individual champions of these projects, but you have somebody who brings all these people together. So that's essentially the essence of SDG1. It's really a platform that we are trying to create, and we're going to do a lot of work from here. That is going to bring all the owners and sources of capital together, and all those that are developing these projects that we are talking about today, and this morning and yesterday together, so that we can have a way that coordinates our activities better, and therefore make the cost of capital better, and make Namibia a competitive producer of renewable energy. That's essentially what we are here for. Was this done elsewhere? Yes, definitely. We are not the first to do it. So we are learning from our colleagues in Indonesia. They have launched a similar program some years ago. Understand it was a program of about $3 billion US, and 1/3 of that is already deployed. Yeah. So we're not going to reinvent the wheel. So it's already done, and we are fortunate that some of those people that have actually worked with Indonesia to put together that program are here. Catherine was one of those people, and therefore, we shouldn't reinvent the wheel. The skills are already here. We must deploy those skills to ensure that we have a platform that is really going to work. Kath, I think I need to leave it there, and I will be happy to answer questions. But essentially, that's what SDG1 is all about. Thank you very much.
I'm inspired, and it's not just because I'm excited by this agenda. This panel is not about me, guys, just by the way. But honestly, a platform that links policy, pipeline, and capital together, that's the type of conversation that we should be having at Davos, because we're putting all the different types of stakeholders together. One of those key stakeholders, I think, has to be domestic capital. It has to be sources of high integrity, high quality capacity, and we already have that in you, Benedict. So I would love to just hear a little bit more about EIF, a bit more about what it means to be, GCF accredited. That's one of the hardest things to get done, and so really understanding the processes that you've gone through to already start on this vision of connecting capital to high integrity pipeline.
Thank you, Kate, for the introduction. I'm really super excited to be here to speak about the work of the Environmental Investment Fund and how it links to the SDG 1 Namibia. I would like to recognize one of the champions behind the Environmental Investment Fund of Namibia Growth. That is the Honorable Minister of Environment and Forest and Tourism. He has been a pillar to the development of the Environmental Investment Fund. The Honorable Minister is the NDA, that is the National Designated Authority to the Green Climate Fund, as well as to the Paris Agreement. So we get our support through his office whenever we are programming, and thank you very much for having you here. It's my honor to talk about the EIF in front of you. Actually, the EIF is a resource mobilization entity that specializes in mobilizing capital for deployment towards low carbon assets that is taking into consideration adaptation and mitigation. So we are like a financing and delivery mechanism for climate investment on behalf of government. So we work with a variety of actors as we deploy our mandate. Having said so, we are accredited by the Green Climate Fund, which is the biggest climate fund in the world. We were among the 20th institution to be accredited to that fund. And 5 years along the line, we applied for reaccreditation. That was last in October. We became the first entity to be reaccredited to the Green Climate Fund. But I just want to break that down. What does it mean to be accredited by the Green Climate Fund? Actually, it is a long process. It means that your governance system, your fiduciary management and accounting principle are of global and international standards. They are comparable to that of the World Bank, the European Investment Bank, DBSA, and any other international entity. Since then, we've developed a series of blended capital for climate action with the Green Climate Fund, as well as with other DFIs, like the French development agencies, to an amount of about 160 million US dollars. We have successfully deployed such capital through a series of intermediaries, commercial banks, civil society organizations, as well as CBOs, that's community-based organization. So what is very important to note is that in all our capital that we've deployed, there's been a very huge accountability for adaptation measurements as well as mitigation measurements. And from a domestic capitalization point of view, we thank the government of Namibia for catalyzing the Environmental Investment Fund. For every $1 that has been invested in the fund, we're able to leverage $14 from development partner working with DFIs and also multilateral environmental and climate institutions such as the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, and the Climate Investment Funds. And where we are going currently is that we want to build the experiences and the lessons that we have accumulated over the years. We've got a pipeline of almost about 400 million US dollars. About 200 of that is with the Green Climate Fund, and the rest we're working with the Climate Finance Facility of the DBSA. We're also working with the Renewable Energy Risk Mitigation Facility of the World Bank. We're also working with the Adaptation Fund. So if you look into it from the context of climate action, it makes extremely good. I'm not marketing the EIF.
Doing a pretty good job.
We are better positioned to support and facilitate the implementation of SDG Namibia 1. We've got the facilities, the systems, operational capacity in place to oversee and coordinate the implementation of such a program. What I've almost wanted to leave out is our high standards on environmental and social safeguards. We have adopted the IFC performance standards, and when I saw those 7 standards in the SDG Namibia 1, I was like, these are the best global benchmark standards for environmental and social safeguards. We are one of the first entity in Southern Africa or in Africa to introduce those standards or to implement those standards, and I think it provides credibility to development partners, multilateral institutions, as well as the private sectors that we work with. We've also worked with a number of institutions, like commercial banks, on designing credit line for green investment, such as the First National Bank, Nedbank, and Standard Bank. Actually, Bank Windhoek. Was Bank Windhoek? Bank Windhoek. That was such a success, Bank Windhoek. We fully deployed that capital towards renewable energy projects in Namibia. We financed about an accumulative 25 megawatts of source of solar energy and a couple of agricultural and sustainable tourism projects. So we're looking forward to the SDG Namibia 1. We are open to engage the private sector, philanthropic organizations, the multilateral institutions such as the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, as well as the DFIs that are working in the same landscape. So we look forward for engagement. Share my contact. I'll be around to discuss more opportunities. I'm sure there's a lot that we can share and build towards this exciting program for Namibia. Of course, this time Indonesia will learn from us. Thank you very much.
Love that. And I just actually want to call out one thing. You basically talked about a mobilization ratio of 1 to 14. Just to give the context for how big that is, currently the multilateral development banks mobilize less than $1 of private capital for every public dollar. It's less than 1 to 1. And so the mobilization of private capital into assets that we're talking about today, and it's not just specific green hydrogen assets, electrolyzers and other things, it's the port infrastructure. It's some of the adaptation and the people stuff that you're talking about as well, Benedict, is really important to hold that number in your mind, because there is no way that we meet the SDGs and climate action unless we crowd in additional sources of capital. And so we need these catalytic funds to be doing what the EIF, I think, is doing, which is crowding in others. I also just wanted to acknowledge the Minister. So I hope that you're excited to hear the success story of the EIF. Thank you for being with us as well. And happy to hear from Bank Windhoek later if you wanted to come in. It sounds like it's also a big success story for you. Now, Andrew is our next speaker. You're welcome to stay where you are or come up. I did promise you that this was a roundtable discussion, so it feels a little bit more formal to be coming up to the lectern, but I am absolutely thrilled that you're with us, because when we talk about SDG Namibia 1, SDG Indonesia 1, it all comes from an inspiring a concept called Climate Investor One, and the brainchild behind Climate Investor One is, of course, Andrew. So we'd love to hear from you. Tell us if this is easily done. Tell us what this room needs to do to make it happen, and over to you.
Thank you, Catherine. Let me try to turn this on. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Is that okay? Cool. So I'm going to sit here, if you all don't mind. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The name's Andrew Johnstone. It is easily done if you believe. And belief comes from and fuels trust, and trust is at the center of blended finance. So that's pretty much all I need to say. I'll hand over the mic now. No. So I represent an organization called Climate Fund Managers. It in of itself is a hybrid organization. It's a joint venture between Sanlam, which is a large insurance and pensions business in South Africa, and FMO, the Dutch Development Bank. Hybrid in the sense that you've got a collaboration here between an emerging markets country and an OECD country and institutions, one between a commercial enterprise and a development organization, and between a Southern Hemisphere and a Northern Hemisphere organization. So even before you start looking at the money, it in of itself is a blending of cultures, aspirations, and people. Then what we've done is we've then created a business which is designing and implementing and promulgating blended finance. And blended finance has evolved alongside the evolution of the business. The business started off almost as a bunch of frustrated project financiers who want to do things differently. And at the same time, it happened in the occurrence of the climate challenge, and the term blended finance arose. So what does blended finance actually mean? Number of different definitions, but the one that I quite like is it's the tactical use of public funds to mobilize private sector funds at scale. So a couple of operative words there. It's tactical. It's not just spray and pray. It's tactical use of public sector capital. Secondly, to mobilize private sector capital. There has to be a private sector component of it. And the third is at scale. It's got to be big. And if you can get those three criteria to work, then you've got something which is a blended finance model. Now, is it easy? No, it's not. Because you're trying to convince money to move into a aggregation model, which ordinarily it doesn't normally do. Public and private don't mix. Getting money at scale doesn't mix. And also the challenge that we have was the reason it came about is in response to what is becoming abundantly obvious, is that neither of those pools of capital in and of themselves is enough. The public sector hasn't got enough money to deal with the demands that it needs to, and the private sector hasn't got the risk appetite to go into what the future holds. And the future holds stuff which is new and big. And those are two things that the private sector really battle with. Certainly the newness. We talk about new markets, new technologies, new business models. We weren't even talking about hydrogen 2 years ago. You know, it was somewhere in the tech labs. Now everybody's talking about hydrogen. And it's terribly exciting, but for a financier, all that represents unknown, and what comes with unknown is the risks associated to that. So what blended finance tries to do is it tries to make risk a friend. Earlier on, you used the term to de-risk. In the blended finance world, we actually don't try de-risk. We try and actually identify and absorb, because the risk isn't going to go away. You know, the models used to be, if you could identify it and you could put a box around and give it to somebody else, happy days. The problem is that when it's new, nobody else wants it. And you can't keep on loading it onto the balance sheet. You can't keep on giving it to the taxpayer and wrapping it up in something else. So you need to come up with new models which are actually absorb this type of risk. And what does hydrogen represent in pursuit of that? A number of things. And it's really the aggregation of it. In and of itself, each component part is doable. We know how to finance renewable energy projects. We know how to finance desal projects. Production plants, ports, all of them individually are fine. It's the challenge of doing it all together on a sector-wide basis, all of which is actually reliant on, at the end of the day, somebody's going to pay for the manifestation of the energy in that molecule. And you've got to back solve that all the way back down the chain to the guy who actually built the port to import the turbine. Therein lies the challenges. So it really is defining the interfaces, and maybe at those interfaces where blended finance has a role to play. Blended finance isn't here to replicate Bank of Namibia or the sovereign wealth funds. It's there to fill those gaps and to do so tactically. And my final point is it's given a very, very useful forum for a whole host of frustrated development bankers to actually find a way to deploy their own money. So you have as much enthusiasm in the private sector about participating in these structures because they are investing with parties who will absorb risk, but they don't want to resist. But risk-tolerant capital, be it the donors or the development banks, are equally enthusiastic to be part of these structures that mobilize private sector capital. And it does work. It does work. I mean, Catherine gave our business a bit of a plug. We have two blended finance vehicles, which we've raised in the last 5 years, Climate Investor 1 and Climate Investor 2. They are similarly platforms. They in and of themselves comprise tactical funds, but they are platforms. And to date, they've mobilized $1.6 billion in 5 years. And that's put 1 gigawatt of power on the wire in places like Nigeria, Vietnam, Uganda, Djibouti, scary places. So it does work. Okay. So Namibia is easy. so it really does work, and organisations like Systemic helping communities like ourselves convene and talk about blended finance, and countries that are well prepared. And this is really what the difference is. My final point between the opportunity set we're looking at. We're no longer looking at projects. We're actually looking at programs, and programs work. Programs work much better than projects. And so these are well-prepared programs. I mean, if we'd had this 20 years ago when we was trying to do PPPs and core infra, it would be probably a different outcome. Because now it's actually being well-prepared. All the parties are leaning into a shared and common objective, and blended finance is not the only, but quite an important glue that's sort of facilitating the conversations. So great to be part of the journey. Love the name. Top marks for the marketing team. And I wish Namibia very, very well. I think it's very well placed within what is clearly a competitive market for both the export and the import. But, being the neighbour, we're well placed, and I'm sure we'll get it done.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Your jokes went down better than mine, so I appreciate that. Firstly, we've probably got a couple of those frustrated development bankers in the room. I can see Leslie there. I don't know if you're frustrated or thrilled with life. But if there are frustrated development bankers in the room, we'd love to hear from you later as well. I also just thought, shall we do a quick show of hands who was not talking about hydrogen 2 years ago? Because that's a good challenge. Who was not talking about hydrogen 2 years ago? I expect quite a few hands, but okay, who was talking about hydrogen 2 years ago? There you go. There you. What did you call them? The nerds, the techies? There we go. So if you need to know the deep hydrogen stuff, go speak to those people who raised their hands. And Andrew, also really thank you for putting us in the context of a sector-wide programmatic approach to what we're talking about, which is a green hydrogen economy, not a sector, not an industry, not a project, but an economy. And I think blended finance as the glue, not the panacea, not the silver bullet, but the glue and part of how we kickstart, accelerate, and really start to showcase, I think, the best-in-class solutions that you guys have talked about all day. I know that we've got Hyphen in the room. I know we've got Aqua Power. There are lots of people here doing amazing things. If we can see blended finance as the glue, I think that's a very nice, if ugly, way of thinking about my favourite topic. So without any further ado, we did talk about private capital as well. And we talked about scale, and we also talked about risk. And of course, I think it would be really interesting to have our friends from Mizuho, Junaid, to talk about how you see those three things, especially in this context. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me in the room. Thank you. My name is Junaid Bello Osage. I'm Executive Director at the Investment Banking for Mizuho Financial Group, one of the Japanese mega banks, over $1 trillion in asset on the balance sheet, and essentially operating in just under 40 countries outside of Japan, and 80% of the Japanese corporates listed companies in Japan are covered by Mizuho. 70% of the Forbes Global 200 are covered by Mizuho as well. I think the only claim to being on this distinguished panel is the fact that I am possibly one of the few Africans who hold a senior or privileged position in a Japanese financial institution. And what that has helped me to form in terms of a direction of travel over the last few years is connecting the dots between Japanese capital, which we all know is massive, and African development, African projects such as green hydrogen. I think it was interesting. I nipped out to get some lunch, as you do after the first session, and I could easily have thought I was in the green hydrogen conference because you eavesdropped on conversations, and whilst there was conversations about blockchain, most of the conversations was around green hydrogen, which sometimes you kind of think, well, that's the nature of the particular discourse around hydrogen. There's one thing I could wax lyrical, as been in investment banking, I could wax lyrical about the financial numbers and modeling, but I think I had one particular goal today, and that's to bring Japan into the consciousness, Japan and Asia into the consciousness of the fantastic work that Namibia is doing. Now, Japan prides itself as a leader and continues to be a leader in the hydrogen space. Japan essentially was the first country to have a formal national strategy for hydrogen. Japan played host, I think that was back in 2017, and in 2018, Japan played host to the first ministerial summit for hydrogen, where the statement on green hydrogen was made, the global statement on green hydrogen, and that's what culminated there. Followed through in 2019 with the first shipment, or the first vessel for liquefied green hydrogen was manufactured by a Japanese firm. And Japan, by the way, has 30%, well over 30% of the patents in the green hydrogen technology space. And then it's followed it on. 2020, the first vessel in terms of green hydrogen transportation, the first terminal, and then obviously the first actual shipment of green hydrogen from Australia to Kobe, Japan. So my colleague, who's actually out in Tokyo, a senior executive in Tokyo, Masayuki Namoto, he's probably online at some point to speak to us. It's about 12 a.m. in Japan. Let's just call it 12 midnight. But he said, I want to speak if there is an opportunity for me to speak. That is how keen the Japanese corporate Japan and the public sectors, public sector players in Japan are keen on the subject of green hydrogen, and particularly on the job that President Genga of the Green Hydrogen Commission and the green hydrogen stakeholders in Namibia have played. So essentially, I think there'll be time for us to talk about mixing of concessionary capital with private capital, but I do think that what we are beginning to see is funds, and I think I was speaking to High 24, the gentleman from High 24 earlier, and I do think that we're going to see quite a significant number of these funds replicate themselves, not just around the EU, but we're going to see quite a lot of that actually out in Japan. In terms of just some numbers, so you kind of understand the appetite in Asia and Japan around green hydrogen. Japan's expected to, or is required to, import about 3 million tons of green hydrogen per year by 2030. And that should lead up to about 20 million tons by 2050. And that's just green hydrogen. Green ammonia is is in excess of that. And essentially Japan does see, and this has become something that's dropped in the conscious. They talk about, who's been conscious of hydrogen in the last 2 years. Certainly not me from a green hydrogen perspective, but certainly from even Africa and Namibia. Because I want to bring it back to the Namibian context. Namibia in the consciousness, I would say certainly in the last 18 months has just flooded, the consciousness, but certainly in the EU as we see, but also in Japan. And the penny has dropped. And I think For the Japanese, we understand that there could be no net zero, in fact, no just transition or green transition without Africa. And I think Namibia is playing that role, pretty much leading the charge on that. So I'll leave it there because that's a message I certainly want to pass across. And I'm hoping that we will take note of, firstly, the Tokyo Investment Conference for African Development, TICAD. That happens every 2 years, but it's Japan's platform for contributing to the African growth story. And for the second time in its history, it's actually happening here on African soil. And that's in Tunis from August 26th and 27th. And that's a platform, again, for Japan to interact with the work that Namibia is doing. I'm hoping that His Excellency would attend TICAD. The Japanese Prime Minister is expected to be there alongside a delegation of Japanese players. And I'm sure green hydrogen will be topical there, just as it's been topical certainly at my lunch earlier today. But I'll leave it there at this point. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a pretty resounding endorsement from an inherently... Oh, yes. I was just saying it's a resounding endorsement from an institution like all of your peers, which are inherently risk averse. You know, banks don't come out and say these things unless they really believe it. So what an endorsement for, I think, not only Namibia's green hydrogen opportunity, but also the institutional capacity, which Benedict spoke to earlier. I know we have your wonderful colleague online. It's midnight. We're just sorting the tech and we'll bring him in. That's fantastic. And it really, again, says that this agenda matters. It matters to private capital and it matters to capital that's not maybe traditionally in a conversation that's looking at Namibian infrastructure assets. So how fantastic. I hope the weather in Tunis is better than some of the weather we've had in Davos today. This gets, how wonderful. Hello. Would you maybe come off mute and we'd love to hear from you. If everybody puts their little headphones on, you'll be able to hear our colleague from Azuho. Please, over to you.
Hi, Kathleen, and very good afternoon. And I'm Masa Nomoto, joining from Tokyo. And strangely, my background looks like a skyscraper of London. I just moved from London to Tokyo, so I just didn't have time to change the background. Sorry about that. But most of the stories I wanted to share with you, my colleague Junaid has shared already with you. But one thing I wanted to share with you is that I see some deja vu between LNG development and green hydrogen. And obviously, some of you may be aware, and Japan invested a lot, both human capital and financial capital, for the development of LNG in the Middle East. And of course, Japan is a country of very limited energy resources. But at the same time, we saw lots of potentials in the region. It took a long time to develop the LNG business there, but we made it. And in the case of Namibia, we saw something very similar. And although there are several challenges, but last time I visited the country, and actually it was the last month, I saw the people, and I saw lots of passionate people. And the human capital the country has is actually very, very similar what we saw, my father's time, my father saw in the Middle East. So we saw lots of possibilities and potentials in the country. So as some of you talked about, the aligning of the risk capital is a big challenge. But I personally believe that we are all working for the next generation, for the future. And I believe the green hydrogen of Namibia is exactly the core of such a vision. So I hope we can work together to make a better world starting from Namibia. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for being with us. It's like having a celebrity drop in. and that was wonderful. We'd love to welcome our panelists back to the stage so that we can pepper you with questions, but really appreciate having that live over, especially in the middle of the night. Normally I do those middle of the night calls in my pajamas and just blur the background, so that was wonderful to see suited up as well. This is where the conversation gets fun. We've got less than an hour. We've got so many brilliant people in the audience. It's going to be a scaled green hydrogen economy, not just because of the wonderful people on the panel, but also because of the people in the audience. So I'm a painful moderator. I just pick on people. And the first person I'm going to pick on, just because he's right in front of me, is Mark Meldrum, who's one of those hydrogen nerds I talked about earlier. And then I would love for you to put up your hands to challenge and question and endorse and support and query our panelists, and to offer your own commitments, to talk about what you're doing to scale Namibia's green hydrogen economy, to keep what the Minister mentioned around a regional transition in mind, and above all, to have this conversation talking about finance. Because I know we've talked about the technology, I know we've talked about the capacity of the country, and our colleague from Mizuho really reinforced that. But this can be our Jerry Maguire conversation. Show me the money, where does it have to go, and who needs to do what? So without further ado, Mark, over to you, and then we'll be chucking the microphone around the audience, so get ready.
Thanks. Okay, so this platform and this session is really about bringing the capital together with the projects, right? So we heard from James some of the headlines from the projects that we've seen and heard about earlier today. I'm going to try to connect that a little bit back to the global decarbonization agenda. I'm going to talk about the Namibian competitiveness. I'm going to talk about how capital is critical to that Namibian competitiveness, and then reiterate some of the exciting things happening on the project side. And hopefully we get into a discussion that really brings together the project discussion and the financing discussion. So just on the kind of global decarbonization agenda, some headline figures. To get to net zero, we're talking taking hydrogen, which is dirty today, gray hydrogen at around 90 million tons, up to anywhere from 500 to 800 million tons. And that's an annual market and sales of hydrogen of about $1 trillion. So this is a big market opportunity. Point two, 50% of that is going to come through hydrogen products. So hydrogen as a gas does not transport well. But if you turn hydrogen into ammonia, which can be used as an end product in fertilizer, it can be used as a fuel for shipping, to clean up shipping. If you use that hydrogen to produce clean steel, which again earlier today we heard about the opportunity to do that in Namibia, combining iron ore deposits. If you use that hydrogen to produce synthetic hydrocarbons, so now you need a carbon source, which again there are cement plants to tap into. There's some potential sustainable biomass. With that carbon, you can produce clean methanol, which is fundamental to how we decarbonize chemicals, and you can produce synthetic jet fuel, which is going to be key to how we decarbonize aviation. So some of these heavy sectors that are now under increasing pressure to get to net zero, to start to deploy solutions, and they are moving. Ships that are going to burn green ammonia as their source of clean fuel are hitting the waters in 2023 with majors like Maersk and others. Yara, who is a major in the fertilizer industry, is pushing hard to figure out how they get to clean fertilizer, which requires green ammonia. So the demand is moving now on the supply side. So obviously many countries who have the opportunity are moving to try to meet this demand. Chile, Morocco, the Middle East, Australia often come up on that list. But I think Namibia has potential pole position here. So they have both incredible sun and incredible wind, and that combination is important because that allows you to get to higher utilization rates and get to lower costs of hydrogen. Now, the wind is kind of focused in the south, and there's a bit in the north. So there's going to be some concentration to some of these pockets, but then even just on the sun for domestic use, you can have and some international, you can still have very competitive costs of hydrogen and hydrogen products. So just on the pure fundamentals, Namibia has that opportunity, right? Now capital. as you've all heard, Namibia is, and there's more in that I'm sure our Namibian colleagues could tell us about how fundamentally sound Namibia is as a source, or sorry, a location for investment. Its stability relative to many others in the region, its rule of law, etc. We've heard about the EIF and how they are practiced. They have a track record and credentials to deploy, to help bring together, mobilize philanthropic capital, development capital, all towards the ultimate goal of scaling up sustainable infrastructure. So the fundamental kind of frameworks and pillars to make this happen are there. And the minister stole my core point, but the importance of this really comes down to the competitiveness. So green ammonia, if you're selling at 450, you're probably going to be, it's going to be tough to get some buyers. Probably there are some keen buyers in Europe who will sign up at that price now. But as the market moves forward, you're going to have to be sub 400 to be competitive, right? And if we can get $30 off the cost of ammonia just with a 1% move on the cost of capital, that's huge. So it's fundamental to competitiveness of the products coming out of Namibia. And then the last point, which I've already kind of made a number of points on, is the project pipeline is moving. For any of you who were in the room earlier today, it was a litany of people sharing the exciting opportunities, Hyphen obviously being kind of the core large-scale ammonia production project. We also heard from ONL and CMB who are doing very exciting things, plugging that into their own offtake. So a lot of these projects struggle with offtake risk. Who's the buyer? They have that sorted in themselves, which is phenomenal. We heard about the iron ore deposits and the kind of stepping stone of starting to produce hot briquetted iron, because developing steel expertise is no small challenge. And so let's take this one step at a time. Let's do the HBI and then ultimately electric arc furnaces and green steel. So the project pipeline is coming forward to capture this fundamental opportunity that Namibia has to be globally competitive. And we have a number of those people in the room. So Tobias, I'm going to call you out. If you want to stand up and share anything about Hyphen, that'd be fantastic. Sven, on your project. But I think really what we want to get going here is that conversation between the project opportunities and the capital providers to get some of that fit-for-purpose capital to help essentially go faster, as Kat said. So maybe just to pick, as this is our favorite thing to do as Systemic, is pick on people. I'm going to pick on Tobias to share a couple of words.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks a lot for the discussion and for preparing this panel. I think from our perspective, from Hyphen perspective, of course, we are currently in the stage where it's all around development capital, where that has a different risk profile, obviously, compared to the actual investment capital. But a few words about the actual investment capital that will come, like we are aiming for financial close, as you saw earlier, around in 2 years' time. We completely share the sentiment around the cost of capital, and that this is a super important input into the cost of the ammonia at the end of the day. We did our own analysis when we screened for. So we as Enertruck, as one of the shareholders in Hyphen, we have development activities across around 10 countries globally. Many of them involved in the green hydrogen side as well. So when we compare the different countries, and if we assume for a moment that cost of capital is the same everywhere, and the cost of the equipment is the same everywhere, and the only difference is the resource, the sun and the wind, then we see that Namibia, yes, is in like the best location, the best place, one out of 3 countries globally. Extremely good positioning. But the price-setting green ammonia plant in the world is not like 5 times more expensive than Namibia. The resource advantage is to the tune of 30, maybe 40%, depending a little bit where we are in the ramp up and who will be the price setting country. So to have a 30 or 40% margin is a great position to be in, but once everything is super efficiently implemented. But it's not the type of margin where you can allow yourself to make a mistake in any of the dimensions that I mentioned, whether it's the equipment cost, or it's any of the other costs, or it's the cost of the capital that goes in. Because a 30-40% cost advantage can very quickly and very easily be eaten up if now the cost of capital is not 4, 5, 6% weighted average, but 12, 13, 14%, then of course you are not to the very left of the supply merit order anymore, but to the very right, and maybe even out of the game. And that's what we see as like two fundamental differences that are directly linked to the financeability and the cost of finance. Two fundamental differences between oil and gas sector and the green hydrogen sector. One, in principle, green ammonia we can do anywhere in the world. The only difference is the cost. But there's no country literally where you cannot make green ammonia. You can do it everywhere. Oil and gas, clearly you can only extract oil and gas where there's an oil and gas field. So it's it's a very different game because you have a much more concentrated supply. And linked to that is the cost differential on this supply merit order that I try to depict now on the green ammonia side of things. We have in the oil sector a much steeper cost supply curve. Saudi Arabia producing at anything between $5 to $10 per barrel, and the price setting plant, as we see now, is at the moment around $100 per barrel. So you have an order of magnitude in between. Whereas on the green ammonia, it's much less steep, which implies in green ammonia we will always be in competition, and it's less around license to operate, which is a little bit the DNA of the oil and gas sector, let's say, because you need to get access to that one source. If you don't get that access, then you are out of the game. Green ammonia, you can always move somewhere else, either within a country or to a different country. So that is inherently in competition. And then on the cost side, I don't want to sound too, let's say, but let's say, I mean, if Saudi Arabia is inefficient in getting the oil out of the ground, it doesn't matter, right? I mean, whether you produce for $5 or for $10, whether you make a $90 margin or a $95 margin, it really doesn't make a big difference. In green ammonia, it matters a lot. Yeah, if you are inefficient and in these dimensions, capital cost and so the cost of the equipment, capital cost, and the cost of capital, you might price yourself out. So that's our view as Hyphen on this. And of course, we are very interested to hear what the funders and DFIs look at in the different phases of the development, where we see not just in our project but in general, you know, the phase where everything starts, the development capital phase, where it's a completely different risk profile and things need to get in order first, and then of course the actual fundraising for the actual investment. And would be interested to hear the views on, especially for the big ticket, what are your views in terms of who are the natural owners / long-term investors into this green hydrogen sector? Would be interesting to hear your thoughts there.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And everyone hear me okay? A bit of an echo? No? All good? Great. Firstly, I just wanted to acknowledge again, we've had the Minister for Mines and Energy join us. Really appreciate your time with us today. We've now got Minister for Environment, for Mines and Energy, and for Finance. If we can't get something done here with that leadership in the room, then we're in trouble. So without further ado, I think we heard about cost of capital, we heard about project development, and there was a question to our panel, which is really important. I think we'll just take one more comment and question and then go back to the panel. Leslie, I don't know if you wanted to come in. It would be interesting, given we've been talking about those frustrated development bankers. Maybe our colleagues from FFI might come in later as well.
Thanks very much, Catherine. My name is Leslie Masterop, and I'm Chief Financial Officer of the New Development Bank, which is headquartered in Shanghai, or the BRICS Bank as we're also known. The bank has since expanded, though, beyond just Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Now also have Egypt, Bangladesh, Uruguay, United Arab Emirates, and so on. I wanted to comment on the issue around the cost of capital, because I think that seems to be a central and core consideration in developing the green hydrogen industry. I'd say the first point I'd like to make is that development banks, and here I'm referring to the DBSA, the Africa Development Bank, the World Bank, banks like ourselves, New Development Bank, we are natural anchors for this industry. Development banks have a development mandate. We look at the world more through longer term lenses. We have the highest credit worthiness because these are the only AAA rated institutions. In our case, we are AA plus rated institution. We can raise money in the market at the lowest possible levels. Obviously, we would then charge an additional spread in order to make a commercial return, but it is still the cheapest sources of funds. I mean, so the first point I'd like to make is that it's very important for Namibia, as it develops its green hydrogen strategy, industrial strategy, to collate and bring together a syndicate of the development banking institutions, because we can play that role. The second point I'd like to make is that it's important to look at it also through a regional lens. South Africa is developing a big industrial strategy around green hydrogen. It is very important, given that we are neighbors, that our countries ought to work together and look at it through a regional lens. Because there is a competitive element. We've heard about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia just launched the biggest green hydrogen project in the world right now, $5 billion in a place called Neom, which very few people would have heard of, but it's kind of a futuristic city that is currently under construction that the Crown Prince announced 5 years ago. So the second point I'd like to make is the importance of that regional dimension of not just looking at through a national lens. One of the things we're doing now as multilateral banks, and just to end off there, you know, historically for the last 7 years or so, of the existence of development banks, we've always looked at the nation state as the core. So for example, if a loan is made to Namibia, the country becomes the sovereign guarantor. But public goods has a regional dimension, whether it's electricity, whether it's climate change. There's a regional dimension to these public goods, and therefore we have to look at the funding model differently so that you don't just look at it through the lens of one country. Presently, for example, we're doing a project in water in Lesotho. We're doing the second phase of the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. So the dams are located in Lesotho, but the asset, the water, is used in Gauteng, in one of the leading provinces in South Africa. The point I'm making here is that even though South African government is the guarantor, the asset is physically located in another country. So we need to look at different models and modes of financing away from the traditional sovereign state as the center. There's no reason why, even though South Africa Namibia is not yet a member, hopefully they will become a member of the New Development Bank, but South Africa could anchor a project with a Namibia partnership embedded in it. But let me just acknowledge that the leadership that, I've seen the document and I've heard about and followed closely what is being done in Namibia. It's really exciting, the level of thought that has gone into developing a medium-term strategy for the green hydrogen economy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And again, another endorsement, regional sectoral transition, and also I think the opportunity, capturing the opportunity, looking through an innovative finance lens. We'd love to go to our panel to get some reactions. Please, over to you, and then I'll go back to the audience, so get your questions ready and get your hands up.
Just a quick point, just a quick point I was going to make. You won't like me saying this, but you mentioned the NEOM project, but one of the core proponents of the NEOM project is right on the corner, Mr. Padawan. Is my mic off? Someone said it's off. Okay, so I was very indeliberately calling out Pat Padawan, who's with us today, and I'm happy you're here, part of this conversation. I think it's Leslie made some very, very key points, and one of the words he mentioned is anchor, and we all know this. It's about capital follows name, and that's what I've seen in my years of being in investment banking. And I think for a project like Namibia's, firstly, someone mentioned trust in the panel. And I think whilst this is a financial theoretical conversation to a degree, I think in practice what we find, especially in renewable energy and in the green hydrogen space, trust will play a big role. And what the guys have done in Namibia, I think 30% of the work has been done in terms of building what I call a clarity of purpose. And that's something that certainly investors want to certainly see, or financiers want to see in these kind of investments. The reason I went back to names following capital, I think the path is finding the right anchor investors. We've mentioned the MDBs. within the private space as well, private capital space, you could split that into strategic investors and purely financial investors. And the strategic investors, as far as we have seen it in the last 18 months, they're chomping at the bits in terms of green hydrogen projects. Now, while that might come with certain conditions, which Tobias, as you know only too well, and you will also find through the Hyphen project, those are conditions you have to walk through. But what you will find is that some of your biggest supporters might actually be the strategic investors who have been playing in the conventional space, but are looking to, get involved in the green hydrogen space, and they're flush with capital as well. And then you look at the financial investors who, they come in following. Firstly, they follow the multilaterals, where the multilaterals are going, who have de-risked, but essentially they also follow the strategic investors as well. And I think it's important to use those relationships to ensure that you get a full. We talk about blended finance, but a full, if you like, of a full spectrum of investors. Thank you.
Thank you. And we've got that question lingering, who are these long-term owners and who's willing to come in as a financial investor, a strategic investor? So really interested to hear your reflections on the comments, Andrew, as well.
So I think I just want to pick up this differentiation between the public markets and the private markets, because the industry as it is at the moment feels and behaves very much like the infrastructure market. It feels like an infrastructure play. And infrastructure has been dominated by alternatives. They're liquid, they're monopolistic, they produce predictable cash flows, all the type of things that pension funds and long-term investors like. And that's all good. The problem is the alternative assets market in terms of the global economy is less than 10% of the capital that's out there. Most of the money that's available is actually in the public markets. It's in cash and bonds and listed equities. So the challenge is actually taking this asset class, which is big in itself. It is, however, retail in its nature. They're going to be crafted within the models of PPPs, but unlike a normal power project which has got an offtake with a utility that you're putting your faith in the balance sheet of the utility, these are going to be interfaces with other either other private parties throughout the whole value chain that ultimately turns out in the retail market. And it's tracking that risk all the way back, and ultimately it's going to end up, in my view, initially in the private markets. So you're going to be talking to alternative equity players. It's going to be the MDBs or the people that we've heard about, but they only have a finite amount of money. So we have to find ways of actually mobilizing the capital markets. And again, Paddy's the master in this. His business has done exactly this. So how do you take the couple of billions, which you will be able to get from the people in the room, to the tens of billions and the 100 billions? Well, we're going to learn from Paddy.
Should we hear from Paddy before we go down the rest of the line? Happy to mix it up a bit. But Paddy, we'd like to hear from you briefly, and then we'll go back to
Well, thank you very much. So earlier on, I put up my hand to say that I had heard of, or I got involved in hydrogen just, longer than 2 years ago. It was actually 2.5 years ago. So it was a sort of recent cut.
So you qualified.
Just made the cut. So had you said 3 years, I would have definitely. And so I'm privileged to lead a company that is entirely focused, or used to be entirely focused, but it's sort of expanded itself, producing energy and desalinated water as an investor, developer, operator. Today operating in 16 countries with about a 40 gigawatt platform, 6 million cubic meters of desal water we produce every day. So as Andrew pointed out, yeah, we have grown very fast. It's about a $70 billion asset platform that we have built, pretty much across what the world calls emerging markets. All of it financed with private and what is now being termed as blended financing and private debt as well. So as we started to get involved in renewable energy in a big way, we realized that in some of the markets that we operate in, we're pretty much in this part of right across the equator, where the sun shines and the wind blows hard at night, so you've got fairly long duration of renewable energy. We were starting to deliver at $20 a megawatt. Just to give a point of reference, these are countries where if you were really properly accounting for the alternative using fossil fuel, even in a country like Saudi Arabia producing at peanut sort of prices, fossil fuel-based energy, you're supplying energy at sort of like $80 to $300. So all of a sudden, albeit when the sun is shining and when the wind is blowing, but then that can be stretched to something like 16, 17 hours, because the wind also blows at night, you can deliver at like less than $30. So we said, well, all of a sudden now, electrolysis process, which is 75%, the cost of producing green hydrogen is electricity, starts to become potentially attractive. Did the numbers and realized that it was, that we could. Okay, so everybody is focused on the cost of electrolyzer being too expensive because it's built on the back of a garage, but we realized that if we were able to do it at scale, we could fairly quickly transform. So anyway, ambitiously managed to persuade 2 other partners, and cut a long story short, we have gone into construction today on what is turning out to be the first green hydrogen production plant at scale. So this plant will produce 250,000 tons per year when it starts to dispatch in Q4 2025. So that's 650 tons of green hydrogen a day. That's more than the green hydrogen that's produced by all the plants in the world today. And we're very confident, and having now taken that project into construction, so we've obviously got all the numbers, and we've gone into construction with over $1 billion of pre-equity commitment. We will financially close it in June, sometime the sort of third week of June, and go into full construction. So we're very advanced in the financing process as well, the whole financing. We've seen how so there are lots of numbers for hydrogen out there, green hydrogen, and we can see with that first plant itself how quickly we're able to bring that cost down. I am personally, I mean, there are a lot of people in my team who would say a lot of things because we're not supposed to talk too much about it, but having said that, what I can tell you is that I'm very confident just with 2 more of this sort of scale projects, you will be below that kind of ammonia prices that you're talking about. By the way, so today's fuel price, ammonia is $1,000. Okay, so okay, fine. Don't know for how long. 1,500. Yeah, 1,500. Okay. Now I don't know how long, what the fuel prices of the future is. The good thing about green ammonia, green hydrogen, green ammonia, is also God doesn't charge us for the fuel, so it's fixed. Once we have sort of locked in everything, it's fixed. The good news for the Namibian project, and you've got the resources, so the primary sort of requirement is having that basic resource. And the good news for the Namibian project is the fact that the first project, most likely, because the development will take time, will come in a couple of years' time, 2 to 3 years' time. And that's good news. And the good news is because you will by then have got a couple of other big projects coming online or going into construction that would sort of bring more people into the supply chain and would start to reduce the capex. And also, you'll be allowing yourselves a couple of years for the current crazily rampant inflationary environment to kind of calm down a little bit. And the supply, for me, it's not even just the inflation, it's also the availability of components right now. That issue to get resolved, because there's a huge amount of investment going in, we know, into more capacity for solar panels, for electrolyzers at scale, for control systems, for all sorts of things that are pretty critical for that kind of a plant. So I think you're absolutely doing the right thing at the right time, and with the right approach of a very coordinated, and it needs to be coordinated, and it needs to take advantage of the opportunity to industrialize. Because the issue for me today, from where we sit, producing hydrogen is never going to be the problem now as we go forward. We're going to produce it for, I think very soon, like $1.50 a kilo. And we don't even need to wait till 2030. But then transporting it. So the first project, we're going to convert it to liquid ammonia and shipping it. And by the time liquid ammonia, recrack it back to hydrogen, you're wasting so much of energy, so much of cost along the way you're building up. So you need to fight. But then, why are the steel mills in Germany? It's because the coal was there. That was the only reason. So as much as we want to continue to resist and struggle to keep it there, I'm sorry, they'll have to come to the place where the resource, the real basic ingredient is. Okay, and the good news is in countries like Namibia, you've even got the raw material. So it's not even a case of shipping that stuff around. And can you imagine what we will be doing if we kind of reduce the global volume of shipping from a carbon emissions perspective? Right now, we're moving stuff from here to there to back to there and back to there and back to here. Okay, so this is real multiplier impact, and with $35, you have no issue with just transition. You have no issue with social and economic development, because energy is at such a cheap price now. All of a sudden, you can create huge multiplier on the back of that. When it was $200, there wasn't a hell of a lot you can do with energy at $200 to create more value. At $35 a megawatt, you can create a huge amount of value. So I argue that the de-risking that everybody talks about is already done. There, huge risk, whether it was in United Kingdom or whether it was in Namibia or Wagga Wagga land, at $300 or $200, huge risk. Because you can't do anything with it, you're going to default. You're going to be excited about buying it on day one, but in day 5 you're going to run out of money and you don't know, because you can't create any value. It's exactly like the mobile phones, by the way. Why is it that the whole world, everybody is running around with little mobile phones, even in the middle of Africa? Not because they're talking to their friends, it's because they're adding value. It's so cheap. Energy is not, we don't recognize it, but energy is so cheap now. It is getting cheaper and cheaper. So we should, so the risk, default risk, is gone. DFIs need to first understand that they shouldn't be talking about premiums. They're development finance institutions. They're not Goldman Sachs. Sorry, I'm not picking on Goldman Sachs, but they get confused. They get confused. Most of the money that is going into the developing world, by the way, is going from DFIs. And then we all know that most of the money that's going in is like 5 times more expensive than it's in the rest of the world. So who's charging that 5 times more? It's the development bank. Sorry. So they need to start recognizing that the risk is different. They have got a development mandate anyway, and that will push private sector, us, to recognize that also, to then, and to multiply faster. Thank you, sorry.
No, thank you so much. And just, see you, Leslie. Thank you for your comments as well. That's what you call calling someone who's walking out. It's not very nice, is it? So nobody else leave. No, I know you will have a hydrogen session very shortly, so we've got 15 minutes left. But I just wanted to, before we pass back to the panel, we'll get your final reflections. But I saw our colleague from the Energy Development Company. You were nodding along at Paddy's comments. And so I just wondered if you wanted to come in briefly. I'm sorry we don't know each other, but Joseph, you may have some comments.
Actually, I'm amongst friends. I just met the Minister of Finance, Minister of Mines, an old friend of mine. We've been talking about it. The critical thing for me, which I've shared before, 2 quick points. One, and I've challenged the Minister of Mines and Energy before, that while Namibia has been dealing with the challenge of poverty, you now have a challenge of wealth. And I'm not so sure which is a bigger challenge. And with all the financing, at the end of the day, how do we build this Namibia that everybody dreams of? That's one. The other part of it is that I believe, I was listening to my fellow Nigerian there, and I'm very proud of him. At some point in global history, we have to reverse the assumption that certain people have a special place at the top, while others are told to find their place somewhere down. It's quite clear to me, and this is philosophical, not political, that perhaps Africa has come to the point where we need to lead the world to make it a better place, because those who've been leading the world so far are not doing too well right now. And I think that industrialization that is connected to the source of the material, which then enables us to transform society, is key to achieving this dream. Thank you.
What a way to get us back to the panel. Thank you. Benedict, over to you for comment.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. We heard about blended financing. We heard about fit for purpose capital. And from where we sit as EIF, we've got an interest at localization and participation of Namibian entrepreneurs in the whole scheme of the green hydrogen development. And the Namibian entrepreneurs also seek for a certain kind of capital that is fit for them to access and participate in our schemes. Honorable Minister, can I correct the nut on the on the green board? So what we are working on a green bond program, which the minister has put together, a green bond working, a working group. It's funded by the EU, and we're working with the GT Global. There's a first report that has been produced, which is under commentary, and we hope to finalize that work within the next three months. We're still cracking on the numbers, but these provide the set of capital for local entrepreneurs to access and participate in the whole scheme of the green hydrogen development. We're working with the Green Climate Fund on that particular green bond with the European Investment Bank. We are searching for anchor investors who will give partial guarantee to the whole bond program, working with Treasury and the central bank. And I think such kind of having a diverse source of capital, will permit a crowding of different players to participate and benefit through the whole scheme of the green hydrogen development. Thank you.
Brilliant. I'd actually really love to say maybe two things, and I'd really I really wanted to start off by thanking Paddy for giving us, I think, a very holistic perspective of what we're about to embark on. What we want to do, you've been doing for a few years. And I think one of the things that I find most exciting is the regulatory intellectual curiosity that the Namibian government is exhibiting. Our willingness to learn from Junaid and Namoto-san from Japan, our willingness to listen to the wisdom of Uncle Joe from Nigeria, and I'm sure, I'm looking at the minister's notepad, his willingness to take a lot of what Paddy was saying, because we're ready to go home and start crafting a responsive and relevant, globally relevant Synthetic Fuels Act that Honorable Alwendo and the rest of the Green Hydrogen Council will put together, is what I find to be extremely excited to be a part of as a young man. Because we know that we are trying to make the world a better place, but we also know that, as our president said, Namibia was always a child of international solidarity. So we don't want to do it alone. In fact, we're putting in place these mechanisms like this blended financing platform to not do it alone. So as a young man, that's the one thing I wanted to say that I find super exciting to be a part of. The second is, I wanted to say that Namibia is lucky, but I realized it's not lucky. It has been designed by thoughtful leaders. And today, Namibia has more than 100% of its GDP in contractual savings. I used to be an asset manager for a living 10 years before I joined government. So my job was to deploy pension fund capital into capital markets, debt and equity. And today, when I suggested this to the Minister of Finance, it didn't take long before you heard Benedict now talking about putting together a green bond or a sustainability bond. Those financial instruments aren't just there to raise potential sort of concessionary capital, but it's there to mobilize the people's assets. So when I start thinking about Tobias's question to say, who are the natural owners of these assets? If you look at what Paddy them are doing in the UAE and in the Middle East, they're deploying their pension fund savings into assets that are engendering a better future for the people of the UAE and for the people of the world. So could you imagine a day when the GIPF, the Government Institutional Pension Fund in Namibia, that has about 70% of the pension fund assets in Namibia, deploying a green bond into an asset that was developed by an international consortium of players? That begins to make you think more thoughtfully about who are the natural owners. And to speak then lastly on that intellectual regulatory curiosity, but also the flexibility that our leaders exhibited. When we put out our RFP, our request for proposal, we left that particular question open. We said, we don't know who the natural owners are. Why don't you tell us as the market? So we said, how much free equity, free carry would you give us, and how much equity would you want us to buy? And we let the market define it, and we chose the offer that we thought was the most compelling for the Namibian people. So again, we were willing to learn from the market, adapt, and then continue to draft an enabling regulatory framework. So that's how I wanted to answer that question. And then I'll close by just saying I really, really wanted to say thank you to the systemic team. And I know they're all shy, but they're sitting on the staircase. We could not have pulled this off without your help and without your assistance. And I know you do it as a labor of love as well. And we look forward to working with you in the future. And now I'd love to pass over to a mercurial Minister of Finance to inspire us one last time.
No pressure. Thank you, James. We're all here because of you, so thank you. Over to you. I won't put you under any more pressure.
Thank you very much. I was sitting here and listening to the wisdom that is coming across the room, I'm very, very grateful that you could share the examples of what you're doing, and some of you sharing your frustrations. Again, we started this conversation by talking about the big picture, and I just wanted to recap what is really the big picture. And the big picture is that we are driving this strategy, this renewable strategy, for a number of reasons. One is a development story. So we want to, and Uncle Joe, I will come to your question, because I know you want to get there. He's by heart Namibian, though he's Nigerian by heart. He's also Namibian. So that's why he's asking about these development challenges. So number one is a development story. Develop in the sense that Namibia needs affordable energy for development. Yeah, the minister here has got an audacious target to provide universal access by 2030, if I'm not mistaken. So it's an audacious goal. So he needs energy. He needs affordable energy. So we believe this industry is going to help us to electrify Namibia, providing Namibia with energy, and of course with energy everything moves. Development moves because of energy. So that's one. The second component of the development story is of course, you're not only providing energy, but you also have an opportunity to attract downstream activities. That's again connected to development. So it's going to create jobs. So if you are going to produce, and I'm happy, the gentleman there talked about why do we have steel plants in Germany? If we have affordable energy here, which is green, it must come to where the energy is. So those downstream industries should relocate to come to where the energy is. And again, it is going to create jobs. And it's going to help those of us who collect taxes to collect more taxes so that we can deploy those taxes in public goods. So that's the development story, and hopefully it's going to help to answer some of your questions. Yeah. So the second part, the second part of our strategy is really to be a good world citizen. One, we want to export some of this energy, James calls it molecules and electrons, to first of all to the region. So because the region is very hungry for energy, especially for clean energy. And I made a comment yesterday when we were discussing about the South African strategy that, we're not only a neighbor to South Africa, but we are also a friend, because South Africa has been very kind to us to sell us energy. We have been buying our energy from South Africa, but I think we are at a stage where we need to return the compliments and start helping South Africa to decarbonize. So we want to be a citizen that is going to help the region to decarbonize, but also more importantly, we want to help the world to decarbonize. So that's really the big picture around our green hydrogen strategy. Now, as I said at the beginning, all these things, all these activities, all these engineers who get excited about their projects need money, and this money needs to be coordinated so that we find a way of making what we are putting together in terms of physics and chemistry, more affordable. And therefore, capital is very critical. Somebody called it a glue. I call it the blood that runs in the veins of these projects. So SDG Namibia 1 is really that platform, or one of the platforms that we are going to create to try to bring all these players together so that ultimately we reach these aims and objectives that we are setting ourselves to decarbonize, to help the development story, decarbonize the region, and decarbonize the world. Let me leave it there. Okay, thank
Minister,
you very much.
thank you. Minister, I've never moderated a panel that ended on time, so this is wonderful. And James, you were kind enough to thank us, and I just wanted to thank Nangula as well. We're only here because of you and your team too, so I don't know if you had a minute. It was so lovely that you came in at the end of the session. Thank you for all the hard work, and just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and yes, it has been a great week and a great day of great events on green hydrogen. I think it has been a long day, and I'm sure that all of us will want to kind of call it a day. We probably have got one or two more sessions that are coming up, but I was just asked to say thank you to everybody that has contributed. Yes, and of course a call for action. We have heard that we are talking about SDG Namibia 1, and one thing, I don't know a lot about physics. I studied it about up to grade 12. I was a little bit good at it at school level, but I've forgotten a lot about it. But the little bit I hear about green hydrogen is that in the beginning it is going to be costly, and therefore the decision to invest, it's not going to be an economics one. It probably has to be one that is about fighting a stubborn kind of case that we need to face with bravery. And Namibia is the land of the brave. So we are entering into a brave arena, or an arena of a stubborn problem that wants to come and hit on us, humanity. And somebody who's brave enough needs to stand up and say, let us work together. So Namibia is one of the countries that is standing up. We want to be brave, and we are calling on all other brave citizens of the planet to join us on this journey. Join us on the journey of investment, but specifically, join us in sourcing blended capital that will help us to make sure that, yes, the financial investment decision that is required to bring green hydrogen to the market, it will make it, yes, probably not feasible, but reasonable at the beginning, and definitely a very also economic decision at the end. So thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you very much for your participation. We look forward to your continued engagement. We are talking about the role of the private sector tomorrow, and also on Thursday morning, we are talking about what does this really mean for investment opportunities in Namibia. We've got projects, what opportunities are there? So join us for those other sessions that are coming forward. Thank you and have a great evening.